The fish that shouldn't exist inside the world of the oarfish. Somewhere below 200 meters, sunlight stops behaving the way it does up here. It thins out, loses its color, and eventually gives up entirely. Most of what lives in that darkness has never been seen by a human being. And once in a while, that darkness sends something to the surface that looks like it was never meant to be looked at. A ribbon of silver, longer than a car, drifting in the shallows or lying motionless on a beach. No one called the local marine biology department first. They called everyone they knew, because nothing about this animal looks like it belongs in any ocean anyone grew up imagining. This is the oarfish, and for almost the entire span of human history, the only oarfish anyone ever saw were ones that were already dying. The monster before the fish. Long before marine biologists had a name for it, sailors had several. Coiling sea serpents that could wrap around a ship's hull, beasts pulled up from sailors' nightmares and dropped into ships' logs. Ancient writers described enormous silver creatures with rows of teeth and bodies that stretched on forever. Accounts now widely believed to describe oarfish, seen briefly at the surface and never explained. In coastal Japan, the animal earned a more specific reputation, a herald sent up from an undersea kingdom, appearing shortly before disaster. The folklore got a fresh jolt of attention when a wave of oarfish strandings preceded the catastrophic 2011 Tohoku earthquake. Scientists would spend years trying to figure out if there was anything real underneath that pattern. But here is the strange part. Humans had been finding this animal's body for centuries without ever understanding what it actually was. A corpse on a beach tells you almost nothing about how something lived. No swimming pattern, no diet, no idea what depth it called home. Just a shape and a legend built around the shape. Meet the animal behind the myth. The oarfish carries the scientific name Regulacus, borrowed from Latin words tied to royalty, a fitting name once you actually see one. Early naturalists assumed the fish rode itself through the water using its long pelvic fins like a pair of oars. That theory didn't hold up, but the name was already too good to abandon. What we're talking about is the longest bony fish alive today. Confirmed measurements put mature individuals at roughly 8 meters, with body weights reaching into the hundreds of kilograms. And unlike fish near the surface, an oarfish may never really stop growing. Age and length seem to be tangled together for its entire life. An older fish isn't just older, it's simply longer.
Picture the face first, elongated, almost equine. Then a blazing red crest fanning up from the top of its skull like a crown rendered in fin tissue. The body itself is gelatinous, scaleless, wrapped in a mirrored silver coating that throws back whatever scraps of light manage to reach it. And then there's the orientation. Almost every fish on the planet swims horizontally. The oarfish doesn't. It hangs vertically in the water column, head toward the surface, tail trailing down into the dark, a posture nobody has fully explained. Not one fish, but a small family. What gets called the oarfish is actually a small cluster of related species inside the family Regalicidae. There's the giant oarfish and a closely related Pacific cousin, both placed in the genus Regulacus, plus a more distant relative known as the streamerfish, which has been documented delivering a mild electric jolt when it's handled, a trait that hasn't been confirmed in its relatives. Nearly everything science currently understands about this family comes from just one of these species, and even that knowledge arrived almost entirely from dead specimens. The first formal scientific description dates to the late 1700s, written by a naturalist working from a body that had washed up on a Norwegian shoreline. For roughly 200 years afterward, that remained the model. Wait for the ocean to deliver a corpse, then study what's left. Across every coastline on Earth, documented strandings over that entire span add up to fewer than 250 events. For an animal capable of reaching 8 meters in length, that scarcity is almost hard to believe. Why it's so rarely seen. When an oarfish does wash ashore, it tends to draw a crowd. One famous case from the early 2010s involved an oarfish stranding near a Southern California island that needed more than a dozen people just to move it out of the surf. The rarity makes more sense once you understand where this animal actually spends its life, the mesopelagic zone, sometimes called the twilight zone, roughly 200 to 1,000 meters down. Down there, sunlight is barely a rumor, not enough to support plant life, fading into near total blackness the deeper you go. The pressure alone would be lethal to an unprotected human body, and the water is so still, so free of meaningful current, that animals living there for millions of generations never had any evolutionary reason to build serious muscle. The oarfish exists in a very real sense inside a world without motion. Trying to locate one alive in that environment isn't really exploration in the usual sense. It's closer to searching for a single needle in the largest, darkest room imaginable. When the body finally talked, for nearly a century and a half, the only physical evidence scientists had access to were these stranded carcasses, and a stranded body can only tell you so much. It can't tell you how the animal swims in open water, what depth it actually prefers when healthy, how it finds food, or how it finds a mate. A breakthrough came when an unusually large cluster of fresh strandings hit the coast of Japan over the course of one season, more than a dozen specimens in good enough condition to put through modern imaging technology for the first time. The scans revealed something nobody expected. The oarfish's brain measures barely an inch long, an almost absurdly small organ relative to a body that can stretch past 8 meters. It's one of the most extreme brain-to-body ratios found anywhere in the vertebrate world. The bigger surprise came from the X-rays. For over 2 centuries of examining oarfish specimens, researchers had never located nostrils. The new scans finally found them, tucked right at the tip of the snout, opening forward, essentially inside the mouth itself. To smell anything at all, the fish apparently has to swim with its jaw cracked slightly open, pushing water across those forward-facing nostrils as it goes, hunting for scent the way you might turn your head slightly to find which direction a smell is coming from. For an animal running on a brain that small in an environment with 0 visual landmarks and almost no light, that's a remarkably sophisticated workaround.
The bubble problem. Studying a deep-sea creature up close runs into an immediate obstacle. Traditional scuba gear exhausts a constant stream of bubbles, and for an animal that has spent its entire evolutionary history in a world with no bubbles at all, that disturbance alone is often enough to send it straight back into the dark. The workaround was a rebreather system, a closed-circuit setup that recycles breathing gas instead of venting it into the water. Combined with carefully timing dives around the seasonal plankton bloom, when more animals were already moving through that depth, researchers were finally able to hold position long enough to actually observe a living oarfish behave naturally for an extended period. The specimen recorded during that observation stretched close to 5 meters, among the largest individuals ever filmed alive in that region. What struck researchers immediately wasn't size, though. It was control. The animal wasn't simply drifting. It was actively steering itself, using the long ribbon-like fin that runs nearly its entire body length to move forward, backward, up, and down with precision. The body itself stayed almost perfectly still, held vertically with the head angled toward the surface, while that single fin rippled like a wave traveling through fabric. The level of fine motor control looked unlike almost anything else documented in fish behavior. Redrawing the map.
The genetic results were the real surprise, though. Comparing samples from different individuals revealed roughly a 10% genetic divergence, a gap far larger than expected for animals long classified as the same species. One lineage dominates temperate waters worldwide, including the Mediterranean. A separate, closely related lineage dominates warmer Pacific waters around East Asia. Their ranges barely overlap, and physically, the two are nearly indistinguishable. The clearest difference comes down to a handful of extra crest rays on one species' crown, a distinction too subtle to reliably separate them from physical specimens alone. Even now, the known range keeps expanding. In the early 2020s, one of these species turned up for the first time in the tropical Indian Ocean, caught incidentally by a commercial fishing operation, a region nobody had previously documented the fish reaching. how big, really? Those old legendary measurements, sea serpents stretching well past 15 meters, almost certainly don't hold up under modern scrutiny. The largest properly measured, verified specimens top out around 8 meters. The inflated historical numbers likely came from rough at-sea estimates, photographs shot from angles that exaggerated apparent length, and bodies stretched out on deck in ways that distorted their true proportions. Lights in the dark. During one night dive at the same buoy site, researchers swapped their standard lighting for ultraviolet lamps, and under UV light, 2 previously unknown bioluminescent structures lit up on the oarfish's head, one near the forehead and one beneath the chin. The likely explanation...
That raises an obvious question. In a world this dark and this empty of landmarks, how do 2 oarfish ever find each other? The leading explanation involves pheromones, chemical signals released into the current and carried across long distances, detectable only by other oarfish. Once 2 individuals do close the distance, a different behavior seems to take over. The fish goes nearly motionless and spreads its body wide, maximizing its reflective surface like a mirror held up in the dark. Under that lens, the bright red crest and fins look less decorative and more functional, communication tools built for an environment where sound and sight carry almost no useful information. The first recorded birth. In a remarkable case in the late 2010s, 2 living oarfish were caught incidentally in a commercial fishing net off the coast of Japan at a shallow depth of around 40 meters. One was already dead by the time it was recovered. The other was alive, though it had lost part of its tail during capture. Before the surviving animal was lost, researchers managed to perform artificial insemination, producing the first reliable documented record of oarfish reproduction. What that record revealed
about the eggs themselves was just as strange as everything else about this species. Oarfish eggs are buoyant, vivid red, around 6 millimeters across, and released directly into the open ocean with zero parental care of any kind. The adult simply disappears back into deep water, leaving the eggs entirely to drift and current. Several hundred fertilized eggs were placed into a tank for observation. For context, most open ocean fish eggs hatch within 1 to 3 days. Oarfish eggs took roughly 2.5 weeks. Everything's still unanswered. And that one mystery is far from the only one. Scientists still don't know the oarfish's spawning season. They don't know its maximum lifespan. Its full geographic range is still being revised with each new sighting. Its communication system remains largely theoretical. Even its self-amputation behavior rests on a small handful of observations, plus a single multi-million-year-old fossil. That's the larger problem hiding inside this whole story. Almost every oarfish that has ever entered the human record arrived by accident, washed ashore, tangled in a net, surfacing somewhere it probably wasn't supposed to be. We have almost never gone looking for this animal in its own world and found it on our own terms. The bigger picture. If an animal this large, this distinctive, and this hard to mistake for anything else can remain this poorly understood for this long, the real takeaway isn't really about the oarfish at all. It's about everything else down there that has never washed ashore, never surfaced, and never stayed in the light long enough for anyone to notice. The deep ocean remains the largest habitat on Earth. It influences global climate, shapes weather systems, and hosts the single largest biomass migration on the planet. More living material moving up and down through the water column every single night than the entire wildebeest migration across the African plains. And despite all of that, we have mapped and explored less of it than we have of the surface of the moon.